Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I am going to be talking about Moment 37 and the future of tabletop role-playing game streaming. All right, now, the reason why I'm talking about this today is mostly because of Strongholds and streamings. It's really been on my mind a lot lately that one of the hottest Kickstarters ever in the history of tabletop role-playing games is the Strongholds and streaming. It went over $1 million. We're about to see streaming for tabletop role-playing games that will have an immense amount of pressure behind it and a lot of expectations on it, right? So when you talk about recorded video of events, right, there's an event that I had not been aware of that I am now aware of, and I think it really weighs pretty heavily on what's going to happen for overall for tabletop role-playing games as we go into the future, right? So let's talk about it, right? And that is Moment 37. So, one, I just want to talk a little bit about how I found out about Moment 37, because there's a really good chance I may have never learned about Moment 37 if my life wasn't structured the way it is. So, one, I have a really good friend who is a really elite coder. He's a professional, and he's a very reserved person, right? So he's a good friend of mine, he's a good friend of mine, and recently he had moved for professional reasons, like a couple states away, and so I almost never get to see him now, right? But I was thinking about this guy, and in addition to being this really, really good coder, who I learned a lot from, and just kind of a really unique person, he also happened to be one of the very best tournament level video fight game players on the East Coast of the United States of America. Okay, so he would go up and down the coast, and he would go to different tournaments, and he would compete. He played this really obscure Japanese fight game, Bloody. Oh man, I can't remember the rest of it. Had like these cartoon characters, right? And so, and I was terrible at it, and I would play it with him every now and then, and he would just crush me, right? And so, and he was one of these type players that had a custom fight stick. It was a joystick built into a box, built by people who really know how to make really good joysticks. He would actually bring it to tournaments. It's part of their scene, right? And by the way, I appreciate your patience. I'm going to be talking about video games for a little while here, and then I'm going to shift over to the tabletop role-playing game part. So appreciate your patience. So my buddy had just recently moved, and I was thinking, and I can't hang out with him anymore because it's just too far of a trip. And so I was thinking about him, and up on YouTube came this video about Moment 37 that was in my queue, right? And the reason that's there is I had recently been looking for the newest version of Soul Calibur, because one of my kids was like, hey, the new version of Soul Calibur is coming out. And, I have very limited interaction with video games nowadays. But when I was young, I played specifically Soul Calibur. And the way I played Soul Calibur is I actually played it on an actual video game, arcade game. And so I worked at a clothing store. I was a manager for a clothing store. This is early in my marriage. We had one or two kids. I can't remember then. It was back in like the 90s, I think. And I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah, and then and so basically after work, I would go to this arcade, and I think my shop closed at about 8, and the whole mall closed at about 9. And I would go to this arcade, and I would line up with all these other players for Soul Calibur. And I think this was Soul Calibur 1, maybe Soul Calibur 2, right? In a physical box, an arcade game. And I would play that thing, and it was the only game I've ever been able to do this with, but it actually cost 50 cents because they could charge that. People were playing it. And so I would put in 2 quarters, and if I was lucky and there was no one there, which happened maybe on a Tuesday or Wednesday, what would happen would be I could finish the game out. And that would only happen like, once every 2 or 3 weeks, because the video game arcade had a lot of traffic. But I could put my 50 cents in, and I could finish the entire game on 2 quarters. And it's the only game I've ever been able to do that. So the one time in history where Scott Garibay was good at a video game was Soul Calibur, right? one thing that was interesting was on any other night, I would have to fight the other players, and you would just line up your quarters in a row, and if you could keep winning, you would stay on the machine, right? And it was the same every single night, right? I would come in at 8, I would wait, for a couple turns until I got on the machine, and then I would remain on the machine until about 8:35 every single night when there was competitive play. This Korean guy who did nails in a nail salon would come over and just wreck me, and it was so frustrating. But I remember those days fondly, and so I have a fight game video game history, and I had never been aware of Moment 37. So I'm going to talk about Moment 37 now, and so that's how I became aware of Moment 37. So I watched this video on YouTube that explained Moment 37. So Moment 37 is a pivotal moment in the history of esports. Sports where you're watching people competitively play video games. And it happened in the year 2000 at Evo 37, which is a video game convention, right? It's a tournament convention where people play competitively against each other. The Japanese champion of Street Fighter came in from Japan, okay? And, came in from Japan. And basically, his name was Daigo Umehara, okay? And this is in 2004, and he came to play, the current American champion, or one of the top players. Both of these guys are top players in their country, and the American champion was Justin Wong, okay? So Daigo and Justin, remove all the other players in the tournament, fight their way up the ladder, and get to this pivotal ending, right? And so Daigo is playing Ken, and Justin is playing Chun-Li, and it opens up with Justin just wrecking the Japanese champion Daigo. By the way, Daigo is a specialist. He really plays pretty much only Street Fighter. Justin Wong is a world-class level video gamer that wins lots of tournaments and lots of video games. He's so good he beat most people in almost any video game, right? But he wasn't a specialist, right? So Justin Wong wins the first round. Daigo wins the second round, okay? Then, in the third round, Justin Wong comes out and beats Daigo down. Just hammers his life bar, all the way to the very bottom, and they call it the magic pixel. He had one little sliver on his life bar, where Daigo, the Japanese champion, he has one sliver of life, right? And if he had been hit by a single hit, he would lose the game. Okay. And then what happens is, Justin understands this, so he goes kind of into easy mode, and he kicks off this series attack, right? Which means he doesn't even have control. He doesn't even have control of his character anymore. He kicks off this series of attacks, which it's like 15 separate attacks. And if he had missed, and if Daigo had not parried every single one of these, right, Daigo would have lost. And the majority of these blocks, these parries, right, have to be done on a specific frame, an absolute specific frame of the game, right? The precision necessary to block all of these with tournament pressure in exactly the right time, with absolutely zero tolerance for failure, was tremendous. It was so difficult to do this. You needed an absolutely insane level of skill, and Daigo that day had it, right? And so at that point, he does it. He parries every single one of the 15 strikes that are coming in the series of strikes. And then he finishes with a super and destroys Justin Wong, right? And the video of what I just described, it happened with other players, had most likely happened with other players, right? But it hadn't been witnessed, and it hadn't been caught on screen, and it hadn't happened at the height of a tournament, and it didn't happen in front of 200 people who were also being recorded, right? Who witnessed it and actually had the knowledge to know what they were seeing, to know how hard what was being done was being done. right? And so moment 37 is this absolutely epic moment in the history of esports, right? Because it's two champions fighting, one champion getting into it, literally, back to the wall, and coming back and winning with an absolutely epic victory, right? And it made for incredible streaming. And to this day, moment 37 gets thousands and thousands of streams every day, and it's been watched millions of times, right? So here's my question. Is it possible for tabletop role-playing games who are now going headlong into the streaming world to have a moment 37? Will we ever have a moment 37 within tabletop role-playing games? And if it's possible, has it already happened, right? And if it hasn't happened, what will be the elements that make the tabletop role-playing game moment 37, right? So one, there are some absolute, so the answer to this question may be no. There may not ever be a moment 37 for tabletop role-playing games, right? Because one, the first problem you have is tabletop role-playing games are not competitive, right? So, by the way, when moment 37 happened, the 200 people who were watching, and all of this is on tape. The video of the screen is on tape. The video of the competitors is on tape. And the video of the response of the audience is on tape, right? And so moment 37 is special because not only, no pics, no proof, no pics that it didn't happen, right? There are pics of this. This was captured, right? And that's what's happening with tabletop role-playing games. We used to play these games in the dark. We used to play them in basements. We used to play them at the kitchen table. Now, we're playing them in front of the world, right? So how does that affect our game? And do we have the possibility for a moment 37 within tabletop role-playing games? So the first obstacle that we have, that the first bit of evidence that there may never be a moment 37 within tabletop role-playing games is that it is not a competitive sport, right? And so you can see the energy that is boiled into moment 37 is because one person is beating another person. And one person wins and one person loses. There is a champion and there is a loser, right? Justin Wong, one of the best players in the world, at that moment was a loser. He lost, right? And there's just so much energy in that, right? And we don't have that, right? Now, one of the things I like, and the reason why I play tabletop role-playing games, is this is a cost that we pay, right? We don't have that excitement that I beat you and I get to throw my hands in the air and jump and be proud of what I've done. And the reason why is, with an intense joy. I think we all, walk away from the table happy. And that's one of the other things is we have a possibility of all walking away from the table happy. There's almost no possibility that you go into a fight, into a fight game tournament, a video game fight tournament, and everybody walks home happy. There's going to be people who drove there for a long amount of time, invested time and money, and they go home a loser. And there's almost no way everybody going to a video game fight game is going to be like, oh, I'm super glad I expended all those resources and came home a loser. You know what I mean? And so now that's one thing that's really special about tabletop role-playing games is we have a situation where we can walk away all having a good time, right? But that fun, that are trading the ability for everybody to leave the table having had a good time. We trade an intensity that I think is going to be a problem going forward for streaming, right? It's gonna make it so that TRPG streams, there's a possibility it will make it so that TRPG streams always remain small comparatively to competitive activities, right? So, so I'm really curious of that. Now, let's say I'm wrong, and there absolutely can be a moment 37 within tabletop role-playing games. How would that come about? Well, I think what you would have to do is you would have to see one player exhibiting perfect, absolute, peerless, perfect tabletop role-playing game play. And showing performance of a role player at the absolute top performance level, right? And then also you would have to have a game master showing absolute top performance at the absolute top level, right? And so what does that look like? Well, I think for a role player, they would have to have absolute mastery of the game. They would have to have absolute mastery of the rules of the game. They also would have to have absolute mastery, knowledge of their own character and their player characters, and they would have to be working in tandem with the other player characters. So the perfect role-playing moment would be where a player was exhibiting mastery of the rules, mastery of their own character, and mastery knowledge of every other player character, okay? And then what would the game master have to be doing? The game master would have to be, I think, exhibiting incredible storytelling skills, having set the stage for this really specific story to be told, this really epic story to be told, this really special story, that would be told. And then the GM would have had to have positioned the game to be at a high climax. Maybe there was 2 or 3 sessions where this was being built up to, right? Also, there would have to be stakes. There would have to be stakes for the player characters, right? Whether it be something really epic that they win or something really epic that they lose, right? It very well may it might be a situation where every single player character has died in the round before, and the entire story arc has come down to one player character and one die roll, right? And that player character has gotten to the position they're at by role playing well, right? So I think there is now that I talk it through, I think there is a possibility for a moment 37. I think moment 37 is absolutely going to happen in a Dungeons and Dragons game. I don't think there's any possibility moment 37 will happen in any other game, any other streaming game. And by the way, moment 37. Everything I just talked about, it happened in 2004. And it really is talked about as the genesis of esports, right? The event that really told where money started to flow into esports and attention really started to flow into esports at a much, much higher rate, right? And so I think there is a possibility. So I think you could see a situation where this kind of thing you could have a moment 37 within the more I think about it, I think you could have a moment 37 in a tabletop role-playing game, right? But I think it'll happen in Dungeons & Dragons first, and it's just the math, right? There's more. So moment 37 happened with the most iconic video game fight game in the world, which is Street Fighter. And then for us, our most iconic tabletop role-playing game is Dungeons & Dragons. And that means there's going to be more Dungeons & Dragons games played. And then in addition to that, it means that there's going to be the level of quality for Dungeons & Dragons games is going to be higher, generally. Just because there's, maybe that one's wrong. I'm not sure about that one. Because there's some games where the actual rules of the game almost guaranteed. Actually, I'm going to take that back. Because I think PBTA, the more I've been studying PBTA, I think it almost guarantees a higher level of players. It does. It absolutely does. But I absolutely, just the numbers, I think it's going to come from it has to come from Dungeons & Dragons because there's more games being played. And then the other thing is the streamers, the people who are watching, their response is going to be captured on chat log, right? It's not going to be the epic roar that happened at Evo 37. But in order to have that community there and have them respond to it, it's going to have to happen in a unique way, and there'll have to be an audience. And really, you just don't get the number of audiences, you don't get the quality of audiences because Dungeons & Dragons is so iconic. Nobody's even close. It's arguable that Dungeons & Dragons, there's more Dungeons & Dragons being played than every other tabletop role-playing game combined. And so I really think it's going to come from Dungeons & Dragons. So I'm really curious of your thoughts. What do you guys think? Do you think there can be a moment 37 within our tabletop role-playing game streaming future? Do you think it's going to come soon? Do you think it'll never come? Do you think we're 2 or 3 years away from it? Do you think it's already happened? So I'm really thinking a lot today about moment 37 and the future of tabletop role-playing game streaming. And also, I really feel a little bad for Matt Colville because if anybody ever had pressure to have a moment 37 within their game, $1 million is going to put that pressure right there. Woo! Good luck to him. I think the whole world is waiting to see, the whole tabletop role-playing game world is waiting to see what a $1 million streaming game looks like. I certainly am. Take care.